Jack has left the room, but I would have loved to have thanked Jack for that wonderful welcome to country. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the land of the Kaurna people, and I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. So my task this morning was to talk about a year of uncertainty, a year of ambiguity, 2018, with a South Australian context and a South Australian lens. And let me say from the outset that I'm enthusiastic and hugely optimistic about the opportunities in the future for South Australia. We do live in times of constant change, and this does bring, therefore, ambiguity and uncertainty. But as leaders, and every one of you in this room I see as leaders, we have a responsibility to understand the environment that we're actually operating in and to face these challenges and to capitalise on the opportunities they present, particularly for us here in South Australia. And so the landscape for 2018 really is fascinating. And I'd like to share my reflections with you today across an array of topics, from government and politics to business and to social challenges, recognising the risks that I take in having any kind of political conversation right at this point in time. I will start with the conversation about government. It's hard to have a conversation in South Australia 2018 and uncertainty without recognising that probably the greatest uncertainty we face in the near future is 22 days away from us, with who will form government following March 2018. Yeah, it has endless possibilities in terms of how it might play out. If we do see Labor holding on to government, they do have a largely known and understood agenda, and we can expect them to continue to focus on their investments in job, health, education and energy. A Liberal government, though, after 16 years in opposition, is likely to herald unprecedented change here in South Australia. They have a very clear laid out plan for the first 100 days, and some of the major changes include major machinery of government changes, a productivity commission, which will be a very different landscape, and initiatives such as Infrastructure SA. I'm not going to play out all of the Liberal Party's policies, but to recognise that after so many years in opposition, the extent of change is really hard to contemplate what that might look like at this point in time. But the unknown, and at this point in time the most likely outcome, is a minority government with the support of SA Best, and an SA Best who may well hold the balance of power in both houses. Equally something I don't think any state has seen before. What priorities will it have? How will it work to provide effective government? And what the negotiations will be with either major party in order to form government. I honestly can't predict that, but it's a major factor on our landscape in the year ahead. And the last piece I'd just make in a commentary around government is it is feeling more and more likely that a federal government in its budget this year will announce changes and reform around the way in which GST revenue is distributed amongst the states. It'd be remiss to not have this conversation without a recognition that that also brings extraordinary uncertainty for South Australia and the greatest potential to actually have South Australia as a loser in that change of GST revenue distribution. Turn now to energy. And what an extraordinary change we've seen since 28th of September in 2016 when we had a statewide power blackout. The projects that have been announced have been transforming our energy sector and have made international headlines. Announcements around the world's largest virtual power plant, green hydrogen facilities, pumped hydro projects, the world's largest battery. GFG now plans to produce green steel from Whyalla post their acquisition of Zen. And only yesterday we had the announcement of German battery maker Sonnen deciding to establish a base in Adelaide. The investment, the focus around energy has actually been extraordinary. So let me make 3 points around this. First of all, South Australia is poised to be the world's leader in renewables, including research and investment. That represents extraordinary opportunities. It's hard to predict what that actually means for prices, and you could put 10 energy experts up here and probably have 10 different answers. But the stability and storage measures that have been introduced have the potential for taking South Australia to being one of the lowest energy price jurisdictions in the world. Again, that could be a game changer for our state. And the third point I'd make is that the South Australian public sector should really look at the way in which the South Australian Energy Plan has been developed, procured, contracted and delivered as an exemplar of how the South Australian government and the South Australian public sector can drive change in a competitive environment with appropriate safeguards for spending public money, and how we can bring about change in a short time frame. Turn now to shipbuilding. As PW set out in our report last year, the shipbuilding industry in South Australia has the potential to add over 8,000 jobs and $134 billion to our gross state product over the life of the project. That's 3.4% increase in economic activity every year, year on year, 40 years plus. That's the same as what the mining sector contributes today to the South Australian economy. When you put a B on the end of those numbers, they sound small, they sound inconsequential. The scale of this investment and what it means to our state is transformative, and it really brings about a bunch of questions that we do need to start to really think about as a community and as leaders in South Australia. Where are these 8,000 workers going to come from? Where are they going to live? How will that many people get to Osborne on a daily basis? What demands will it place on our schools, our hospitals and our social infrastructure? What will the supply chain look like for the future frigates and the submarines whilst OPVs are still being built here? And where will those supply chains be located? It really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and all layers of government and the private sector really need to come together in new and innovative ways so that we can make the sort of strategic decisions and planning decisions that will deliver the best long-term outcomes for our state. Turn now to workforce and skills, somewhat related to that. The growth in jobs in South Australia over the last 3 years has been stunning. During a time that we've seen the closure of Holden, we've actually seen an extraordinary number of new businesses set up here in South Australia. And if you don't have a lens into the changing face of South Australia's business landscape, let me share a few examples. Creative industries. If you haven't heard of Mighty Kingdom, Game Hub, Rising Sun, Technicolor, trust me, you will very soon. Technology giants, Cisco, NEC, but even new players such as VeroGuard. We have one of the world's most interesting, innovative cybersecurity firms have now established here in Adelaide and are growing rapidly. Space industries like Fleet Space and Nova. The Health and Biosciences precinct in the West End. Defence industries I've talked about, and our 3 universities. Extraordinary amount of jobs growth coming out of that collective. Really new and interesting organisations. All of them, though, are largely in the STEM sector or are seeking a higher qualified workforce. This has 2 really big challenges for us in South Australia. The first is, where will these employees come from? Where will they come into our state? Where will we be able to bring so much higher qualified and STEM qualified individuals to work? And this is particularly so following the mid-year economic forecast, where we've now got a cap on university student places here in all universities across the country. And the other challenge is that the jobs we're growing are a different skill set from those that we're losing. So how will this impact inequality in our society, and how will we as a society help those who don't have the skills for those jobs of the future? Next area I wanted to touch on was NDIS implementation, very briefly. But just to recognise that the introduction of NDIS brings about enormous opportunities of more money coming into the state, into the sector, and inevitably more jobs. It should be a boon both for our disabled members of our community, as well as the people who serve and provide services to disabled consumers. But right now, established providers are struggling to get packages for their clients, and the pricing of services is not covering full costs. The industry may well need to consolidate but there is enormous potential for pain and disruption before this occurs. Government has a really important role to play to assist this sector to transform and to ensure people are not left behind, and it represents an enormous opportunity, but an enormous challenge for us in the year ahead. The last point I just want to make and touch on is around digital and data in government, something that I hope all of you here in the room are leaning into. And South Australia actually has an enormous opportunity to develop a digital economy, and government has a key role to play in that. Initiatives such as the newly appointed Chief Digital Officer, a growing data analytics capacity within the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and they're working on really complex issues such as child protection and how we use data to be able to really inform new and innovative ways in which we tackle really deep and challenging issues. And the work recently by the Department of State Development to actually develop a strategy to drive a digital economy in South Australia. Government has a really important role to play in this, both through its procurement power and ensuring we have the infrastructure in place to support it, including things such as the Gig City initiative. At the same time, security and privacy will be critical to building and maintaining public trust. A much more coordinated and resourced approach is required to ensure that critical information and digital assets managed by government are effectively secured. So those were just a few of the key thoughts on my mind about some of the big issues for South Australia in 2018. And it's important for me to say that I don't see those as being negative points, and I hope you didn't see that as negative. I see them all as challenges for us here in South Australia, and they're challenges born out of the opportunities that we have as a state. And they're opportunities that are coming from the change in front of us. We have a great opportunity and the ability to demonstrate to everyone how South Australia embraces technology, how we've managed to transform our economy in the digital age, how we can build a sustainable energy sector for the long term, while still retaining our core social cohesion and a great lifestyle. I feel really lucky to be living here in South Australia and very excited for our future. Thank you.